Simon's best line is that impact investing should ask whether it adds more value than it extracts. The case that we bring you in proposition exemplifies how impact investing sold people the lie that we can maximize wealth and save the planet at the same time without necessary trade-off. Yeah, this debate is not about whether impact investments are perfect or not. The question is whether the trend within those outcomes are bought at the cost of a larger structural harm, making society believe that people who profited from or benefit from this crisis and more likely is going to benefit them even more should be trusted to decide which parts of the crisis are worth solving at all. Opposition is basically defending the impact investors while acting early exactly like them in this round. They refuse to take the important concessions, they refuse to take POI, and they don't even have any meaningful material to solve the problem within the round. They want the benefits of sounding socially responsible, but they don't want to admit the trade-off that makes their model worse. The moment impact capital is not profitable, not convenient, or not flattering to private capital, they pull out. That's why the trap happens, because in micro, you don't want them to pull out. That's why you rely on their terms. And in macro, you don't want them to leave. That's why you prioritize initiatives that they have over other critical areas that you might have solved absent the trend. First issue then, and I think this is the only issue that they weighed out, whether or not impact investing manufactures false progress by treating ordinary profitable investments as social change, and in doing so, creates an unfair competition among public problems where the most investable issues are prioritized while the least profitable but most urgent harms are included. What we have told you so far is that it results to redundant investment disguised as impact, but you pull out other more people and you pull out other larger infrastructure in doing so. Joseph was clear that the impact investing only funds projects that have already delivered mainstream financial returns, then it is not creating a new impact at all. Those investments would likely happen anyway in both sides because ordinary capital already has a reason to enter. So when Elo talked about that this is a net positive, I question why. Because these things remain attractive to investors absent the packaging that you are actually creating an impact. But the problem is under the illusion, the scam that once these projects or packages impact, they pull more people under the illusion that their money is helping to solve structural harm once you invest within these initiatives. So when in reality, they're trying to just buying into profitable activity that has morally rebranded over time. That's why instead of investing towards hard and necessary changes, they invest on redundancy under a scam. So you pull more people under this scam. You also trick other public institutions and reduce their accountability under the scams. So no, the examples that they have pushed forward aren't even empirically true because the trend of ESG actually impacts on project that will remain funded anyways. Note that in both worlds, there's no reason for private investor to engage largely on initiative that doesn't garner ROI, like education, like healthcare that they have talked about. They will take the most profitable areas within those areas, and then suddenly, if they don't garner ROI, they will pull out. For example, oftentimes in their best case, that this actually moves towards crucial problems. For example, they still suddenly pull out. But the problem is, they also put public institutions to pull out. And here's the comparative that we have pushed forward on how the trend created a funding chase that distorts civil society, which gained no meaningful response from them. Note the mech here. Calvin was clear. ESG changes the behaviors also of NGOs and public institutions before even investors reject anyone. Because NGOs and social enterprises in their side will start reshaping their proposal metrics and beneficiaries to look more fundable because they know capital prefers projects that are scalable, measurable, and revenue garner generating in their side. So public institutions then copy the same logic. Instead of regulating harmful industries like funding public services or doing the hard work themselves, they start believing that the solution is to simply attract more into private investment. They need to quote-unquote bootleg private investors because impact investing makes private capital look like the gatekeeper of solutions that they have fantasized it to be. That is why impact investing delays real solution and it makes ordinary profitable investment looks like a progress, then reorganizes everyone else around investor convenience. That is the biggest harm in their side. It creates huge dependency on private capital because of the trend and because of the inducement that if you don't invest on these areas, you're missing out the chance to change anything at all. The comparative in our side is better because removing the trend of impact investing does not mean society stops funding good projects. It means that society stops letting voluntary private capital decide which harms deserve attention, which removes the current competition under this issue, like what Calvin talked about. Profitable projects will still receive ordinary investment strategy anyway anyway, but the remaining urgent harms can no longer be dismissed as not investable. Therefore, NGOs will pull out of this, and also public institutions will pull out of this because they need to chase private capital investment. So no, we actually have formulate a lot of more attention towards the right actors to make these crucial investments that markets avoid, like direct subsidy, public services, regulation, or maybe any concessionary funding for communities that are necessary to help but unattractive to investors. That means public institutions do not need to beg private capital. Absent the trend, they can force money toward public harms through compulsory redistribution, just like what Joseph also talked about. That means taxing the industries and wealth pools that benefit from the status quo, imposing fines and liabilities on companies that pollute or exploit. And by the way, this is the reason why ESG is created anyways, to create protection for their companies, requiring firms to internalize the cost of their harms, and all of those mechanisms that we have mentioned in order for you to build a proper responsibility and public duty. So, second then, what are not impact investing terms affected community in the profitable impact sides instead of giving them ownership and control? Because we have talked about why even impact investing doesn't really help those communities that they invest towards on. Because what happens is that communities becomes customers, workers, and borrowers over this metric. They rarely rely on designing their own product through government subsidies. So oftentimes they need to rely on the terms vested by them by those private corporations. That's why it's oftentimes becomes more tractable, just like what we have talked about. And those controls aren't going to be necessarily changed because absent this, you don't have proper regulation and countervailing proposal that actually beats out this initiative. So what we have brought forward is something different in principle. The hardness of change is exactly why their side fails. The real change is hard on both sides, but the question is what each world does with that difficulty. On their side, the difficulty is converted into an excuse for avoidance. If the issue is too costly, too slow, too risky, or too unprofitable, investors can simply say that it is not investable, and all of the time, NGOs and public institutions will wait for it to be investable through their terms. That's why you don't get necessary change for all of the urgent problems that we have. And that's why in our side, the hardest of change will be faced through proper accountability metric and through proper pressure towards these areas, which will become more and more prevalent towards our daily life. That's why the pressure remains, and we can garner more shares in our side.